The Battle of Targu Frumos was a little-known tank battle in the spring of 1944, which has been used as a case study in officer tactical education in the United States Army and other NATO armies, teaching how a mobile defense can defeat an armored spearhead. According to the Soviet plans, in the early spring of 1944, two Soviet fronts were to cut through the Axis defensive lines in northern Romania, thereby facilitating a Soviet advance into the entire region. The Stavka, the high command of the Soviet armed forces, wanted to break German and Romanian defenses in northeastern Romania, capture key cities, and drive their forces deep into Romanian territory. The initial task of Konev's armies was to reach the towns of Targu Frumos and Pascani to surprise the Romanian defenders and thus capture these two towns. General Konev's Second Ukrainian Front approached the region by the 5th of April 1944 and commenced its offensive towards Targu Frumos on the 8th of April. The Romanian Fourth Army was charged with the defense of the region, but it was reinforced by German panzer elements of the 24th Panzer Division and was preparing to hold an initial Soviet advance. However, these early defenses proved to be no match for the Soviet assault on the town, and by the next day, Targu Frumos had been secured. Meanwhile, the German High Command responded rapidly by ordering Hasso von Manteuffel's Grossdeutschland Panzer Grenadier Division to move towards Targu Frumos and recapture it. In early 1944, Grossdeutschland was one of the best equipped divisions of the entire German army. It had a tank regiment mostly equipped with Tiger and Panther tanks, and a lot of units were fully motorized. Despite being a Panzer Grenadier division, it had more combat vehicles than most panzer divisions of the entire German army. Its commander, Hasso von Manteufel, was one of the most experienced military tacticians of the German army, whose skillful and imaginative deployment of tanks repeatedly thwarted Allied and Soviet offensives during World War II. He was the 24th recipient of the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross with oak leaves, swords, and diamonds. The battle is also unique because it was one of the few cases when the German Tiger tanks met with IS-2, the most powerful and heavily armored Soviet tank of the war. The IS-2 was a Soviet heavy tank, the second of the IS tank series, named after the Soviet leader Joseph Stalin. The first IS-2 was received by the 29th Guards Heavy Tank Regiment in January of 1944. The debut of the new tank took place in March of 1944. During a battle, 10 Panzer IV tanks were destroyed, and the Soviet regiment did not suffer losses in equipment and personnel. The Tiger crews of the Grossdeutschland division near Targu Frumos opened fire on IS-2 tanks at long range and were alarmed to see that their previously omnipotent 88mm rounds bounced off the enemy vehicles. The IS-2 tank's 122mm gun could knock out a Tiger frontally at 2000 meters. Similarly, the IS-2 could defeat the Panther glacis at about 700 meters and the turret at about 2000 meters. Therefore, the German High Command issued instructions that engagements between even Tigers and the IS-2 tanks should be avoided unless the Germans possessed a tactical advantage. Early on the 10th of April 1944, the Grossdeutschland division, consisting of approximately 160 tanks, including 40 Panthers and 40 Tigers, attacked westward along the road to Targu Frumos in two columns deployed north and south of the road. Following a heavy bombardment, the Germans broke into the town and engaged the Soviet troops which had taken cover in houses and other buildings. The German thrust cut off a number of Soviet units from their main force and reached the high ground west of the town. Meanwhile, the Romanian 7th Infantry Division advanced from the south, pressing the Soviets back to the north. Trapped between the German armor racing into Targu Frumos from the east and the Romanian infantry counterattacking from the south, the three rifle divisions of the Soviet 35th Guards Rifle Corps had no choice but to retreat. So, only 48 hours after receiving their original order, the German Grenadiers and Panthers had secured Targu Frumos and the regions west and north of the town. After a desperate two-day struggle, the Targu Frumos region quieted down by midday on the 12th of April 1944. After the end of the battle, the Grossdeutschland division erected a new defensive line to protect the town, which extended in a wide arc. Manteuffel placed the Grossdeutschland Panzer General regiment on the division's left wing, northwest of the town, and the Fusilier regiment on its right wing, northeast and east of the town. But he retained his Panzer regiment in reserve assembly areas close to Targu Frumos. The German and Romanian forces successfully defended against the limited local attacks throughout the month of April of 1944. However, the German High Command anticipated that May Day, the traditional Workers' Day of celebration, would see the opening of a new assault by the Soviet forces. The Soviet offensive reopened actually a day later, on the 2nd of May 1944. Behind a 60-minute artillery barrage at dawn, two Soviet armies moved into an attack. The Second Battle of Targu Frumos was a series of engagements and smaller combats over several days, during which armored forces of the Grossdeutschland division and the 24th Panzer Division engaged the Red Army's 16th Tank Corps and 2nd Tank Army. One unit's experience in the opening hours of the battle was described as such. The 1st Battalion of the Panzer Grenadier Regiment Grossdeutschland occupied a well-wired-in defense line. The Soviets advanced in great waves. Their tanks and infantry was mixed together. Moving much faster than the Germans had anticipated, they overwhelmed the 1st Company, wiping it out to the last man. While the battalion commander attempted to halt and repulse the Soviets with what was left of the battalion. The next morning, the Soviets resumed their attack, preceding it with a bombardment of phosphorus shells. Then, over 100 enemy tanks and assault guns advanced. Although the enemy had not made any deep penetrations, the tensions of the first 2 days of the battle had exhausted the Panzer Grenadiers. Despite initial successes of the Soviet attack, a series of counterattacks managed to halt the Soviet offensive. The battle reduced the Soviet tank strength to a point where a continued attack into Romania was not possible anymore. In 3 days of fighting, the Grossdeutschland and the 24th Panzer Division defeated the Soviet force and claimed the destruction of over 350 Soviet tanks. At the end of the Second Battle of Targu Frumos, the front line stabilized. It was from these positions that the Soviets launched their ultimately successful new offensive in late August of 1944. After the battle, Hasso von Manteuffel, commander of the Grossdeutschland division, made the following statement. It was at Targu Frumos that I first met the Stalin tanks. It was a shock to find that although my Tigers began to hit them at a range of 3,000 meters, our shells bounced off and did not penetrate them until we had close to half that distance. But I was able to counter the Russians' superiority by maneuver and mobility in making the best use of the ground cover. Manteuffel also noted that the Stalin tanks had several disadvantages. They were slow and couldn't maneuver enough. As well, their crews were not sufficiently familiar with the new tank. After World War II, the Battle of Targu Frumos was only briefly described by Soviet historians, but it has been used as a case study for NATO officers, teaching how a mobile defense can defeat a large armored spearhead. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and to make sure you don't miss my future work, please make sure you are subscribed to my channel and press the bell notification button. Thank you and see you in the next video.